Okay, can you explain Alabama and dyslexia laws? There's a friend of mine whose teacher says Alabama does not classify dyslexia as special ed. That can't be correct, but it is. And this is why. And I'll throw a link up there so you can see what I'm talking about. Dyslexia. Now yes and no. Okay, it sort of depends. It's all a battle of terms and definitions. Okay, so the answer can be correctly answered both ways. So I'm going to go with the no first. Dyslexia itself is part of the Alabama Administrative Code, but it exists under the response to intervention, which is pre-special education. That's the general education program. It was adopted by the State Board of Education um, and not through the legislature. So it's a policy. It's not a law. Okay, it's different. Okay, the State Board of Education can't create law. They can create policy, and so therefore there's no real enforcement mechanism built into the existing dyslexia policy because they don't have the power to have enforcement provisions put into the policy, the State Board of Education, that is. So it exists outside of special education law. And that's why in the past I've sort of advised parents that, if you're just for the sake of not confusing the process, until that aspect is fixed, it might not be smart to say dyslexia, 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 dyslexia. And I know that those of you in the dyslexia camp are probably wanting to burn me in effigy right now, and that's okay. It's not like I don't agree with you that you should say it and things need to change. I am with you on that front, but at the same time, I've had far too many cases to where, whether intentionally or not intentionally, I see school systems and school staff confused by the term to the point where they're addressing the parent's request outside of special education, abusing the RTI process far longer than they ever should. Instead of referring them over, and also in abusing the process with regards to the discrepancy standard um, for eligibility under IDEA, or using strengths and weaknesses, the patterns of strengths and weaknesses, or the exhaustion of the RTI process to find kids eligible that have a diagnosis of dyslexia. I'm seeing that as a real problem. So that's why I'm sitting there saying, well, the clever ways to sit there and defer or deflect and not serve kids. And a lot of it is that if you use that word, then what you're doing is you're inviting that kind of behavior from your school system. And some of them, it is innocent. There are a few of them that this is calculated on their part. All right. So there's your no. All right. Now, as far as the yes, if your child has a dyslexia diagnosis and your child, um, through the eligibility process, is identified as a specific learning disability, you see, dyslexia can be folded into a specific learning disability, but you call it a specific learning disability in reading, a specific learning disability in math. Now, in a lot of ways, that could be dyslexia, it could be dyscalculia, but at the same time, you sort of have to dance with the one who brought you. And these terms have already been laid out. These terms have already been defined. So that's what I'm trying to say. Now, under specific learning disability, because that is an accepted and recognized federal and state disability category under IDEA for which your child is justified to receive an IEP, then at that point, it's a specific learning disability, dyslexia included, if your child meets those standards. But there's 3 ways that your child could qualify for an IEP under a specific learning disability, i.e. dyslexia. That would be whether their IQ and their achievement scores produce a discrepancy of 16 points or more. Okay, a discrepancy of 16 points or greater. Whether they've cycled through the response to intervention process to where they've exhausted it. And the other one is patterns of strengths and weaknesses. Now, the RTI process and the patterns of strengths and weaknesses were intended to throw that net out for those kids whose scores are deficient, but not meeting that 16-point discrepancy standard because the tests themselves are not identifying your child's particular issues and in the combinations that they're occurring. Because with dyslexia, there's not one particular way to define it, okay? And it shows up in varying ways in different children. So the intent behind patterns of strengths and weaknesses and cycling and exhausting RTI were intended to throw the net out to catch those kids that aren't going to show up necessarily as 16 points or greater with regards to their predicted achievement. Okay, so there's your answer. It's a yes and no, but that's how you get to that yes and that no.